All right, so let's get started. So this short, one second, record. This short hour-long webinar is going to be focused on preparing for the transition to the new 2022 Louisiana Student Standards for Social Studies, specifically for grades 4 and 5. This is actually part of a longer series of webinars. Just 2 weeks ago, we covered K-3, November 14th. We're going to do 6th through 8th grade and then high school, with a few other sessions extending into the next year. So hope to see you, if those sessions are relevant, hope to see you on those calls too. We're going to introduce ourselves real quick here, or actually I'm going to introduce us. So I'm Sean Diamond. I'm the social studies lead here at the Louisiana Department of Education. My two amazing colleagues, Chandra Phillips and Samantha Chesaner, are waving here on the call. They'll be answering questions in chat and kind of monitoring the room. Please, if you do have questions that I don't end up addressing during the webinar, we will hang back at the end. And you could ask them in chat, and if we're able, we'll knock them down one at a time there. All right, so I'm actually gonna turn my camera off here. Hopefully everyone else has as well. We're gonna get right into it. Okay, so we've got just under an hour, but we got a few different objectives for this session. The first one is we want to update you on some timelines and some supports that we are working on that will be available for grades 4 and grade 5. So that's the first thing. Then I'm going to talk more broadly about how social studies supports reading comprehension and literacy. Then I will spend the majority of this webinar talking about the major shifts in both the content and skills for grades 4 and 5. And then finally, we'll wrap up here talking about a few different ways, things that we think would be appropriate that 4th and 5th grade teachers and coaches and administrators can begin to do now to prepare for the implementation of the new standards next school year. Okay, and our agenda, not shockingly, follows those agendas here. So I'm not going to be redundant here. We're going to update you on supports, talk about literacy and social studies, big shifts, what teachers can start to do now in their various forms of professional learning might take at their school site. Okay, so first update here is we are beginning to review new social studies curriculum that are submitted to the department as part of our instructional material review process. We created a new rubric with some national partners, including Ed Reports. We're really proud of this work. We think it kind of walks this narrow path between pushing publishers and developers to create materials that we think are really high quality without getting into the utopian realm, knowing that nothing would be reviewed well. So I would just highly recommend. The link is actually in this deck, which is in the shared drive folder that my colleagues have probably dropped into chat already. But it'll be linked in this presentation, which will be posted on the social studies landing page shortly as well. So just check this out. I think it's a quick way to see the kind of elements that we'd be looking for in any high quality social studies materials, and you could maybe use it to take a look at what you're currently using and think how well your materials may or may not align to our vision of high quality materials. Okay, second update, and I'm just going to start with kind of a mea culpa here. We are still working on these course frameworks that we first introduced at the Teacher Leader Summit months ago now. We still plan on completing these. It's just the timeline has slightly shifted here. So I had originally said at the Teacher Leader Summit, we were hoping to deliver these all by December, but that date has shifted back a little bit now, and we're looking at late March, early April. We are going to release them on a rolling basis. So once we're done with units, we will post them again on the social studies page on Louisiana Believes, but they will not all be done until, like I said, late March at the earliest now. And just to recap, if you haven't heard about this before, these are intended to be replacements for the scope and sequence documents that we know are pretty widely used, but they're not exactly the same form. So instead of, there's no scripted lesson plans here, especially in this kind of 1.0 version here. What we are offering is we're translating the new standards into units and topics with some suggested pacing. And then for every given topic here, you'll have all the material organized around a big framing question, and then more concrete supporting questions that hopefully help students build up to answering that big question. And then for each supporting question, we'll have a whole bunch of suggested or highlighted sources. And these will be, video, audio, images, and text. Again, I mentioned at the summit, we're trying as much as possible to pull material that's not copyrighted into our internal drive so that the links don't break in 2 months. Another update on this is we got some feedback, some really good feedback at Summit about the kind of usability of this format. And so instead of having like each image individually linked here, we'll have all the images for each supporting question in a single slide deck. And we think that'll be a lot easier for teachers to just kind of pick up and use in a few different ways. So again, course frameworks still coming, just the timeline has slightly shifted, and I do apologize about that. Okay, and then last update on different things we're cooking up is the instructional strategy and activity bank. Again, we did mention this at the summit. We are working on this, and we'll release it as soon as possible, probably a few months before the course frameworks are all complete. But this is going to be a bank of activities and strategies that are useful in social studies classrooms. We know that entries are going to include tools and protocols around contextualizing sources, or just contextualization more generally, how to annotate in social studies and what that looks like in primary versus secondary sources, guides for different forms that debate can take in the classroom, but also deliberation, which is slightly different. And then maybe this affects grades 4 and 5 a little less here, but reading aloud in social studies classes and what that looks like. So again, this is going to be somewhat in the same form that's on offer for ELA. So each of these strategies will have like a one-page document that outlines the what, when, and why, how to implement it, a few videos. You can kind of see and hear how this looks in 4 and 5 classrooms. Just to give a quick example here, this is something that was inspired by the excellent materials from the Gates Ventures OER World History Project. If you haven't ever checked that out, it's really cool. I would recommend it. But here's like a simple thing that can be done, at the beginning of a lesson to help contextualize students in that material, right? They record a question they're trying to answer, the claim they're trying to make, particularly what event, person, or process they're looking at. And then they try and put that process on a timeline and find something they know that happened before and after to kind of put it in that their kind of internal chronology. And then they would place this event, person, or process on a map, right? If it's, it could be a world map like this, or a more localized map. But this is just an example of what we're talking about here. Okay, so those are the really 3 big updates. Again, we are reviewing new materials in the IMR process. If you want to know the specific curriculum that will be reviewed, that all gets put out by the IMR team in their weekly updates. So you can check that out. We're working on the frameworks with a late March, early April delivery, and we're working on our instructional activity and strategy bank. Okay, now I want to shift gears and talk just more broadly about why we believe social studies in elementary school, and I'm including 4 and 5 in that, is so important, and how it really supports the development of reading comprehension. Shouldn't be seen as something detracting from the time they'd be spending in English language arts. Okay, so this was really my plea for the importance of social studies in the elementary school here, right? That it supports and doesn't detract from the development of literacy, and that reading historical texts, especially primary sources, is really going to help students build a foundation of knowledge about the world that sets the condition for reading comprehension. And notice here I said set the condition. I didn't say build their reading comprehension skill. So if you visit classrooms in Louisiana, especially ELA classrooms, and honestly the nation, you're going to see statements like this being made, or sometimes even posted on the wall. Things like, good readers ask questions, good readers create pictures in their minds, good readers make connections when they read. This is all true and great. They're modeling what good readers do. But it's not enough to teach students what good readers do. We got to teach them what good readers know. Your ability to make meaning of any given text is not really a skill you can directly practice, right? It is not like decoding, right? Learning your alphabet. Reading comprehension is more complex. It's a reflection of the amount of knowledge and vocabulary that you have. And herein really lies the paradox and problem with raising student achievement, is that you actually need some knowledge and vocabulary to gain more knowledge and vocabulary. So if we kind of think for where we want to be and work our way backwards a bit here, right? So the typical college freshman enters their first year having about 60,000 words in their working vocabulary. If you do the math, that means that they would have learned about 10 words a day, 70 words a week, 3,300 words per year. If my own children are an example, we know that, they're not learning those first 10 words in the delivery room, right? So there's this huge amount of knowledge that has to be gained. And if you're going to be successful, it really, really helps to start early. And that's because, everything a child sees and hears contributes to their reading comprehension, and the effect is cumulative, right? Think about how compound interest works, right? Students who are rich in knowledge and vocabulary tend to get richer because knowledge builds on knowledge and language builds on language. Researchers have taken to calling this the Matthew effect after this biblical passage here, but in plain English, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this is why we think building knowledge in a purposeful and coherent way in the elementary grades is so important. And that's what we've been trying to accomplish with these new standards. And then, of course, any curriculum that would align to them would have to do this, right? And so this kind of expanding horizon sun graphic here hopefully kind of illustrates that. And that grades 4 and 5, while there's big changes, there is a rational process behind this change. Okay, we think that building knowledge in this chronological, coherent way is going to be difficult to change to, but ultimately will pay dividends. Okay, and this is not just a philosophy unsupported by data here. So the Fordham Institute, which is based out of Ohio and DC, used a very large federal data set, almost 20K students. They followed from kindergarten through 5th grade. And they found that students who received an additional 30 minutes of social studies instruction had much higher reading scores by the end of 5th grade. Further, what's also interesting about this was they noticed that the largest gains were accrued in lower income families, non-English speaking households, and girls, right? All showed improved reading ability with time spent on social studies, right? Because reading comprehension is, like I said earlier, it's not just decoding, it is a reflection of your knowledge and vocabulary. And all of the nonfiction, authentic text you're going to be exposed to in good social studies classrooms is going to make you a much, much stronger reader. Okay, so that ends my Jeremiad about literacy and social studies. We think social studies is the natural partner to English language arts in terms of building students' reading comprehension. Okay, time to switch gears again to what's going to make up the majority of this this quick webinar. I'm going to talk through not all of, because that would take honestly a whole day, but the kind of major, biggest shifts and changes in our expectations of the kind of skills that we want students to develop and the kind of content we want them to master and learn. All right. Now, if you've looked at the new standards, which I hope everyone has, they were approved in March, you'll see that the skills and practices and content are separated out. Right, the first handful of standards in each given grade are generally the skills and practices, with a few exceptions, then followed by a whole bunch of pretty explicit content standards. And again, we did that to avoid having to have a companion document, have everything kind of one-stop shop. I just to make sure that we're not sending mixed messages here, though. Instructionally, when you're teaching in the classroom, these things always go together. There really never should be a week where students are like, we're focusing on sourcing for the whole week, right? there's always some content attached to that skill, or at least there really should be, right? So you can't draw a map of nowhere. You're not going to analyze the cause and effect of an event. There's always some event, right? The predicate needs a subject. So just to be clear, in terms of instructionally, skills always go with content, but for our purposes, we've separated them here. Okay, so of all of the grades K through 8, fourth or sixth grade, but today we're talking about fourth and fifth. So fourth grade has the biggest change. The content of the course is almost entirely different, right? Previously, it was kind of a survey of American history. Now it's a survey of the ancient world. So I'm going to talk about all those content changes in just a second, but first I want to zero in on what's changed in terms of our expectations with skills. And if you look at the fourth grade standards and compare them to 2011, there actually are a good amount of similarities in some of these skills. So let me just talk through some of those. So if we're talking about reading and making timelines and then using them to explain how things have changed or stay the same, very similar to 2011 standards. The geography skills are also very similar, but they're just being applied to very different content, right? So students are still expected to locate and describe hemispheres, landforms, continents, oceans, rivers, mountains, deserts, cardinal and intermediate directions, climate, environment. That is all the same. The biggest change for 4 and 5 is in my mind, very clearly our greater emphasis and expectation on what students can do as sources and how students should be making and supporting claims about social studies content. So in terms of sources, right, it's that they're able to pull claims out of the sources and then figure out if those claims are actually substantiated with some kind of evidence, and compare and think across multiple types of sources, right? So how does this map relate to this text that I read? And then moreover, not just be able to analyze others' claims, but make their own. And that these claims, they can also support with evidence. If you notice 4.5C here, we have explain cause and effect explicitly in there. That's because the work groups who are drafting this, I think the idea was this was a big thing to stress, right? Thinking about causation in history is really no simple thing. And again, I think it pays dividends to start early here. And let me just give some examples of how this relates to kind of other skills and practices in grades 4 and 5. So we have these two standards, 4.3, 4.4. And we really want to push students to make connections and compare, right? The biggest ideas and events and developments, in this case, in ancient world history. We really see 4 and 5 as kind of a continuum here. And it's really about laying out the big picture, kind of, the enormous horizons of world and Western history. We want students to trace, right, the developments of important ideas over the long duration, to give them a real solid foundation about what the majority of human history has been like before they begin their renewed study of Louisiana and American history in grades 6 through 8. Okay, so what ideas, what events, what developments? Let's start talking about the content. So students in grade 4 will broadly be covering the origins and development of what is sometimes referred to as first and second wave civilizations. These are 4 content standards that are going to apply to almost every unit and topic in this grade level. And they really, in my mind, represent the big ideas in the course. So I'm going to talk through these. So the first, I'm not going to read the standards verbatim here, but what I see is the big ideas that come out of them. So the first one, how did physical geography influence the development of ancient civilization? All right, so this is going to span a lot of different places here. So from the Tigris and the Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Nile in Egypt, the Himalayas and the Gobi Desert in China. We want students thinking about how the contours of the natural physical world have influenced history. Right, so just real quick example, but I'm sure maybe people are familiar with on the call, right? China's extremely unique culture and society. There's a lot of different causes there, but certainly one being the Himalayas, the Gobi Desert, and the Pacific Ocean being natural barriers isolating them from the Occident for most of human history. Okay, moving on. the historical development of belief systems in the ancient world. So if you look at the standards, you're going to see things about, polytheism in Egypt, Greece, and Rome, monotheism in Judaism, Confucianism in the Warring States period. All right. So what role do these belief systems play in, people's everyday lives? But again, here we're really focusing on, the development and spread and how these belief systems have affected history, not the doctrinal beliefs of any given world religion. Right? That is not our focus here. Okay, and then lastly, and probably the biggest and most important idea here is both the effects of the agricultural revolution on the development of civilization and the characteristics of civilization, right? These are the kind of lenses that they're going to apply to a whole bunch of different places, right? So culture, specialization, infrastructure, government, writing, social stratification, though not using that word. They're going to be looking at these elements in a whole bunch of different places, and hopefully kind of getting an appreciation for the incredible diversity of human experience. Okay, so this is the first page of the fourth grade course framework, where again we outline the units, topics, standards, give suggested pacing. The progression through the grades is mostly chronological, and it makes sense for us to also then keep that chronology going within the grades. So that's why this is laid out the way it is. That's why, if you've had a chance to look at this before, you'll see that like Greco-Roman history and Chinese history is kind of split into two pieces, so we can keep things moving chronologically. But again, we were trying to inculcate in them this sense of the enormous sweep of time, the fragility of human institutions over a long period of time, and sometimes the kind of arrogance and hubris of various different empires. So just really quick, I'm going to talk through. There's 6 units in grade 4. They're going to start studying what life was like for Paleolithic human beings, how people came to inhabit nearly every corner of the earth. They're going to learn about the agricultural revolution and what that meant for human society, namely the development of civilization. And it's in that first unit, again, we're going to try and build this kind of shared vocabulary that then will apply to all the rest of these civilizations they look at throughout the year. 2 other quick notes about this course. Beyond just keeping things chronological, Unit 4, the growth of empires, that also is, I think, a really cool opportunity because Eastern and Western Han Dynasty essentially happened at the same time as the Roman Republic and Empire. So students can think more broadly about what empire really means, and they can have kind of a comparison between the two, which we think will be really, really cool. And then finally, the last unit, technology and new evidence revealing the past. That topic is meant to kind of tie the course together by having students look at some more recent discoveries and how that's affected our historical understanding of the past, right? We want students to understand this idea that history is this ongoing, active pursuit of knowledge. And as archaeologists or historians uncover new information, our claims shift to take that into account. And since they will have just been learning about the Maya, we thought this was a really cool opportunity to then talk about some of the new discoveries that have happened in South America using LIDAR and stuff like that. But this idea about sources and artifacts driving our understanding will hopefully be really pretty present in our course framework from this unit, right? So things like Henry Schliemann and Troy, how stuff like that is going to appear all over the course framework. Okay. So I'm sure there's more questions about grade 4, but my last note here is going to be that there is a lot of geography in the standards in grade 4. And it is very, very specific and descriptive, at least I hope it is. Again, this was done so that, we wouldn't have to wait to come up with some companion document to clarify what we mean by geographic features of ancient India. Right now, the ones that we expect students to learn are clearly spelled out. For every single civilization, the kind of group of standards around a civilization, the first one is this geography standard. So, again, this is hopefully going to be really reflected in our frameworks and any curriculum we find to be high quality, but world geography is a big, big part of grade 4. Okay. Moving on to grade 5, and this is going to go a little quicker here because literally everything I said in terms of the expectations for skills and practices for grades 4 applies to grade 5. Right? These were written in a grade banded way, so they read the same. And for the of course, students are going to have more time to work on these skills since they've been through grade 4, but the expectations are the same here. So I'm not going to waste your time and repeat everything I said, but the biggest change again is in terms of what we're expecting students to do with analyzing primary and secondary sources and the kinds and the quality of claims that they make. And then again, these standards are exactly the same around making connections between ideas, events, and developments, comparing and contrasting events and developments. Now we're just applying it to the kind of second half, if you will, of world history. I would love to give super concrete dates for each course. That's actually pretty challenging because, since we're looking at so many different civilizations, there's not a concrete single year that will line up perfectly for every group here. But for grade 5, it's roughly kind of, fall of Roman Empire 1476 to around 1580. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I voice over the first page of the framework. Okay, so again, a lot of similarities in grade 5, right? They're also going to be continuing to look at how physical geography influenced the development of civilizations and empires, just different civilization and empires. And they're going to continue to think about the origin and spread of major world religions, just different world religions. So grade 5 also has 6 units. So we're beginning in medieval Europe. Actually, medieval world is not strictly only medieval Europe. I'll talk about that in a second. But medieval world, medieval African empires, civilization North America, Aztec, Inca, Renaissance, Reformation, and the first global age. Let me talk through the first unit here. I think someone is unmuted. All right. Okay, so we're going to start the course in medieval Europe following the collapse of the Roman Empire. So they're going to be looking at, feudalism, manors, castles, pages, squires, this type of thing. Before moving on to the second topic, expansion of empire, war, and reform. And that's going to cover the development and spread of Islamic empires and caliphates, the golden age of Islam. And then once students have been introduced to both, medieval Europe and Islamic empires, then they will learn about the Crusades. Before we turn back a little bit and study some reforms in medieval England, particularly around Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry V, and the Magna Carta. All this again is in the standards. And then for the last topic in Unit 1, they're going to look at the 100 Years' War, particularly Joan of Arc, and the Black Death. Then students will move south to study medieval African kingdoms and empires. So this is Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Learn about Mansa Musa, the spread of Islam to these kingdoms, the development of trade routes, trading in salt, gold, and enslaved people. After medieval African empires, we're going across the Atlantic to study cultures and civilization in North America. This piece of content actually is somewhat similar to the current grade 5 course, just in a different spot. After that, we're moving to the Inca and Aztec empires. So again, something that is similar to the current 2011 grade 5 standards. We have Maya covered in grade 4 because chronologically that actually makes sense. The last 2 units in grade 5, however, are a bit different than the previous 4, which actually look a lot like grade 4, kind of comparative civ. But here now we're kind of turning back and trying to bridge the gap between the medieval world and the early modern period. So students are going to look at the Renaissance broadly, not just the Italian Renaissance. The Reformation, again, we're not going to be, this is not in any way trying to get into like the doctrinal differences between Catholicism and Protestantism, just the effects of the Reformation on Europe. We're going to look at the beginnings of the scientific revolution, particularly Galileo. And then the last unit is going to be around European exploration, conquest, and colonization, Columbian exchange, and the transatlantic slave trade. A note about this too, this is going to mostly focus on Spanish, the Spanish experience in the New World. English and French colonization is really going to be covered in grade 6, where there'll be much more time to go much deeper on that. If you're thinking about 1580, if you think about Roanoke, that was pretty specifically done to put all that in grade 6. And then also with grade 5, a huge emphasis on geography. And just like grade 4, the standards are very, very specific about what that geography actually is. Okay, so that was pretty quick. Hopefully I didn't go too fast, but those are the major changes as we see them in both the skills and practices and content for grades 4 and 5. Hopefully the course frameworks as we release them will further illuminate what specifically is covered in each of those units and topics. But at the end of the presentation or email, we love questions and feedback about this. Okay, so for our last bullet, we're going to talk for a minute about what we think would be appropriate for teachers, coaches, mentors, even administrators to begin to do to prepare for these new standards. One of the things that went through our minds preparing this was, we really don't want to overwhelm teachers who already have had, so much on their plates and are doing such heroic work. And of course, they're still teaching the 2011 standards, and grades 4 and 5 have a LEAP test. So we're trying to be conscious of all that. But we do think there are a few things that could be done now that would help set people up for success. And so we're not trying to do everything over the summer and that first year of implementation. And those two things are this. The first one is build content knowledge to support teaching these new standards. We are very aware that grade 4 teachers probably become experts on US history and teaching at that grade level, and that now they have this whole new set of standards to teach, and there really isn't much connection, right? A crosswalk between the 2011 standards and the 2022 standards would be a blank piece of paper, right? There's very little there beyond those few similar skills I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So building content knowledge is a big one, and we'll talk in a second about where and what you could use to do that. The second one is building capacity and comfort with teaching using primary sources. This is likely not something totally new for 4th and 5th grade teachers. Certainly the department has been speaking about this since I started attending Teacher Leader Summit in 2016. But for a lot of places, this maybe message has not entirely trickled down. And we're hoping that the design of our frameworks, further emphasizes the importance and how to use primary sources. So this is another thing that we think could be a useful way to spend professional learning time. Okay, let's talk about building content knowledge. Okay, so certainly there is no shortage of collegiate textbooks or high school. You could read Strayer's AP World History textbook, and that would cover everything in grades 4 and 5. But I don't know if it would. First of all, I think it would be overwhelming to ask people to do that on top of their teaching responsibilities. But I don't know how helpful it would be to translate that into like, how does this look when I'm teaching it to a 4th grader, right? So there are two things that we think could be helpful here. Probably the best resource for just broadly world history is teacher guides created by the nonprofit Core Knowledge based out of Virginia. Just to be totally upfront and clear, I'm not endorsing their curriculum as an instructional resource right now. It has not been reviewed by IMR. And certainly there's things in our standards that are not in their materials. There's things in their materials that are not in our standards. But for grades 4 and 5, there is a lot of overlap. And their teacher guides offer pretty concise resources that are specifically made to build teacher content knowledge about these topics. So I'm just going to walk through how these actually look. But in that folder that was hopefully shared at the beginning of this presentation, you'll find a PDF that has links to a whole bunch of teacher guides that are related to grades 4 and 5. So these teacher guides open up with this big idea, and they give an overview of a few paragraphs of what this unit is all about. Then they have these bullet pointed lists of what students need to learn and these really wonderful timelines, right? Very few people, maybe no one, is an absolute expert on all of these topics. So having a timeline, I think if you're not familiar, can be really helpful to quickly kind of get some understanding. And these bullet pointed lists are very concise. Same thing here, kind of at a glance, like what is this all about? But the best part of these is they have really in-depth sections called what teachers need to know, and they'll go through all the geography and all the content. Here's an example from medieval Europe about the rise of monasteries. Right. So this is something that they're not very long, right? The maximum these teacher guides are for any given topic, 5 or 6 pages. So this is something that teachers could read together and annotate and discuss, prior to the standards being implemented. That would help them feel comfortable teaching this content, knowing that they're giving students accurate information. So again, not promoting them as a instructional resource. We have not reviewed them, but to build teacher knowledge, these are nice guides, and they're freely available. You download the PDFs. They're really easy to read. This is what that link in the folder actually looks like. So you can see for grade 4, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, same topics we have. They have Maya, Aztec, Inca all in a single unit. We've cut them apart in 2 different grades, but the idea stays the same. Okay, for grade 4 teachers, who some of the standards actually touch on Louisiana state history, particularly pre-Columbian indigenous history, we have another resource that you can look at. So hands down, the best free resource for Louisiana history is 64parishes.org, which is made by Louisiana Endowment of Humanities. The Department of Ed has a partnership with Louisiana Endowment of Humanities to create articles to support the new standards. The first batch, which includes a few articles for grade 4, are actually are available right now, and we're working on more in our next contract. They should be available sometime early next year. These articles, we took the original articles, which are written, for college students or very, very bright high school students, and brought them down as much as we could to fourth grade level here. But that being said, most students could still not be successful reading these solo, individually, without support. Teachers would need to do a lot of scaffolding, a lot of chunking, providing some vocabulary words. And that's the kind of thing when we have these featured in our course frameworks, exactly the kind of thing that we will do to make them more approachable. I understand if you read them right now, you might be like, well, that's pretty intense for a 4th grader. But here's how they look here. So here's the one for poverty point culture. So if you go to 64parishes/education, you can actually search by grade level or standard. As more articles become available, that'll be a more useful feature. But here are the grade 4 articles that are actually available right now. We've got Understanding Prehistoric Louisiana, the Paleo-Indian period, the Archaic period, the Woodlands period, the Mississippian period, and poverty point culture. Again, these if you're not familiar with this history, this could maybe seem a little overwhelming, but really the sort of changes between each period are actually pretty clear, right? So like Woodlands period, the big overhead changes that we archaeologists find bows and arrows and atlatls. Right? Mississippian period, you see much bigger buildings, and people started to bury their dead with jewelry and pottery, right? And of course, poverty point culture. So that's a resource available for 4th grade teachers. If that material is new or unfamiliar to you, highly recommend you check out 64parishes.org/education. Okay, and then for our second bucket of things we thought would be appropriate for teachers to begin to do was, again, to kind of familiarize themselves with the kind of why and how about using primary sources. So this graphic we love and displayed a gajillion times at Summit, summarizes kind of what we see solid social studies classrooms is following this general instructional pattern here, though not necessarily always. But the second graphic here, exploring sources, we wanted to give some more guidance on that. So we created a grade 4 and 5 specific primary source guide. If you attended the previous webinar, we have the same thing for K3, but just want to be clear here, they are not the same. They are not the same. So I'll talk about why here now. So this primary source guide, we hope it kind of accomplishes a few things here. It's not groundbreaking, but first we try and give a why, right? So we have on the second page of this kind of our feelings about why we think primary sources are so important and helpful and engaging for students, especially when we're learning about ancient world history. What are some guidelines for using them with students in grades 4 and 5? And we created some graphic organizers and a whole bunch of different verbal cues that teachers would ask students to try and get them to engage with that source in an appropriate and ultimately beneficial way. So here's that first page I mentioned where this is kind of like our why. This would, we think, be great for you to read with your 4th and 5th grade teachers. Have them annotate and discuss it. Hopefully this is convincing if they're already not on board. But the bulk of these are, like I said, these verbal cues and graphic organizers we've given to help kind of instill in students the kind of historical thinking skills that are very explicit in the new standards. So for each type of source, we have a different set of questions here and a different graphic organizer. So the idea is always to get students to first observe the source, right, on a pretty surface level, then think a little deeper about it, and then wonder and ask additional questions they might have. And these questions, again, the teacher is posing, but the idea is that this kind of becomes part of a student's internal monologue when they're looking at a source. Okay, so I'm just going to read a few of these questions. Again, nothing groundbreaking here, but so for verbal cues for observe, right? So just like, what do you see? Are there anything on the page besides words or images? Some sort of decorations, right? When they're looking at some medieval manuscripts, right? They're going to see really awesome stuff in the margins. For think, right? Where do you think this came from? Who created this? Why do you think someone wrote it? Okay, these are all those kind of sourcing questions. And then this is again is available in that folder. I do want to say one word here. If you came to the K3 session, you might have noticed and you're looking at the 451 now, you notice that it's shorter. That's because this is a primary source guide. And if we're thinking about the things that will be primary sources in ancient history or medieval early modern history, it's not going to be a photograph. It's not going to be a video. We've kind of stretched the definition a little bit on audio because we do think, some things that were written within the period would be wonderful for students to listen to and can be treated like a primary source. And of course, they're going to look at photographs of architecture and objects and art that are all primary sources, but the same kind of questions around who took the photograph would be totally irrelevant for what we're asking students to do here. So an example of the text here, this is a very, very excerpted and very short segment of the Song of Roland. This would be for grade 5, something students might look at to try and dig into what chivalry really meant. And this is an example of one of these graphic organizers. So this could be filled out as a whole group while the teacher's soliciting these questions early in the year, and for the students to write, and then maybe them to do on their own in small groups or even individually, depending on their ability. Okay, so it's 4:15. I just want to really quickly recap some of the stuff I just chatted about here. So we want everyone to walk away with a few things here. So what supports are we working on for 4 and 5? We're trying to find and review new social studies curriculum. We expect something to be submitted pretty shortly. Check the IMR weekly updates to hear more about that. We are still working on the course frameworks, deliver late March, early April, but we will release them as they are completed. So there will be something before that, but they won't all be done until then. How does social studies support the development of literacy and comprehension? By building knowledge, right? Students are going to build a lot of knowledge in this class that's going to enable them access to a wide variety of texts, not just things within their own milieu and personal experience. While that's very important, having a lot of mirrors in your education, windows are just as important. And that's what social studies can really, really offer, especially these two grades. And then finally, how can 4th and 5th grade teachers begin to prepare for the transition to the new social studies standards? Build content knowledge, and build content knowledge. I did want to just kind of make everyone aware that the Division of Assessment Content is convening review committees to review new assessment items in grades 3 through 8 and high school civics, January through March. This is going to include, classroom teachers, instructional leads, people with grade level expertise, and they come together to review sources and items to make sure they are aligned, accurate, clear, and fair. If you're interested in applying, if you've had issues with sources or items on the previous test, apply to help us do better. The deadline is November 30th. The link is available in this presentation, or you could email assessment@la.gov with further questions. I want to highlight some of the resources that we have available that maybe people aren't aware of. If you haven't really looked through the page, it is at times maybe not the most readable. We are going to work on that too. But we have all the webinars that we've been doing are all located on that top link. And if you look at it now, you'll see that you have the Zoom links to the future webinars, but the previous webinars, those links change into a recording, right? So if you missed one, it'll all be on that same PDF. We have a frequently asked questions page that's being updated as we get frequently asked questions. And my colleague Samantha did a wonderful job with a Q&A webinar in July, where she kind of just actually spoke over these frequently asked questions. So you could also check that out if you don't want to read the whole document. And again, I'm going to stay, or we're rather going to stay on the call for a few minutes here, and I'll try and answer some questions if you have them in chat. But otherwise, if you have a question about anything I just said or social studies stuff more in general, you can email classroomsupporttoolbox@la.gov. And if you have questions about assessment, cohorts, item types, this type of thing, please email assessment@la.gov.